Thank you for joining, thank you for joining Tuesday Talks with FEO. My name is Debbie Mann with Festivals and Events Ontario. We're starting to do our Tuesday Talks every Tuesday now at 11 o'clock. This week we have Jolene MacDonald as our guest from Accessibrand. And just to give you a bit of history of Jolene so that you know that she knows our industry. Jolene was, when I started here back in 2005, Jolene was our designer for our logo and our events guide. So she has some history with FEO, and she's bringing her expertise on accessibility in print, website, and face-to-face. So welcome, Jolene. Welcome back,
Debbie.
actually.
I'm so excited. It's been so long. We've known each other so long, but we hadn't seen each other. So this is great. Thank you.
I'm really glad you're here, and thanks for doing this with us. So Jolene has 17 years experience. She's been a successful entrepreneur, mom, pet owner, and daughter. And she also has some experience in the disability realm. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So Jolene, do you want to, take it from here? Maybe bring your PowerPoint up.
Sure. Let me just pull that
up
a
little bit.
Oops. If I can get it to work properly here. Not sure that, hang on, I'm going to reshare that again. Can everyone see that okay, or is it on presentation mode?
It's on presentation mode. It's okay. We can see your notes and everything.
Okay, because I need lots of notes. So that worked okay then?
Yeah, works okay. It looks great.
Okay. So I read notes at the same time because my memory is horrible, but I just wanted to thank FEO for having me. It's been so nice to reconnect again after all these years. I love being a part of the FEO organization way back when. I know we did a lot of public speaking back in the day too at some of the events for design on a budget for festivals and events. So now I'm coming back with a whole different perspective. So like Deb said, my name is Jolene. I am the founder of Accessibrand. Accessibrand actually means accessible branding in its right sort of word altogether, made it all creative. We are technically a full service virtual accessibility focused design and marketing agency. However, we also provide just accessibility services. Our team is actually a collective of design, marketing, and communications professionals that have all been impacted by disability in their lives and require flexible work. Just going to a little bit more about me. So I've been in the industry for 22 years with school. This is my family here. My oldest daughter is Jana. My youngest daughter is Joy. My son is Jonas. My husband is Jeremy. Yes, we are all J's. But the reason I put this is because this company was founded because of my life experience. I started in a large agency out of school when I graduated from Conestoga as a designer. I was then in-house designer for the city of Kitchener. Then I co-founded another company, and I was the founder for 14 and a half years. And I think 4 years ago, I left because I was struggling with a lot of life issues. But my youngest daughter right here in the front, she actually was diagnosed with a rare form of dwarfism when she was born. So that took up a lot of time. Obviously, we have 3 kids, and a lot of research and assessment and trying to figure out what that was. So I was very much inundated with appointments, OT, PT, and then when she started school, a lot of advocacy and accessibility. But 4 years ago, when I left my company, I was actually struggling with health issues myself, but doctors thought it was just related to stress. Clearly, I had a lot going on. My dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. My son was struggling. It turns out all of my kids may actually have the same diagnosis as myself with Ehlers-Danlos, which is usually invisible. It's connective tissue based. So I decided it was time to make my exit. I did try working for someone else for a year, but with having chronic pain and fatigue, it's really hard to manage that. So I founded Accessibrand in 2017, and I only freelanced for a few years before I got into doing it full time like I am now, just based on life and what was going on. Oops. So just to talk a little bit more about Accessibrand, as I mentioned, we are, you know, if you look at us from the outside, we're just like any other marketing agency, but we're not, because we are accessibility focused. And in most agencies, accessibility is often an add-on or an afterthought. It's a byline and a quote. You get a website quote, and it'll be X amount of dollars. And then they'll say, and here's how much it is to make it accessible. Our projects are accessible right from the beginning because our team has all lived experience with all different types of disability. Current accessibility software too, which if you're struggling to make your website accessible right now, you may see little plugins for, you know, WordPress and things like that. Let me just say, we won't get into it now, but there's lawsuits happening for those. So they miss the details and the personal experiences with the software. Accessibility is not just accessibility, it's also userability with people who have disabilities. And then the final part of our company is that with persons impacted by disability, whether they're a mom like myself, who, you know, basically felt like she had to give up her career because they have a medically fragile child, it's very hard to work full time. Or if it's someone who has, you know, been born with a disability or impacted, they very often don't get full-time work because they can't be accommodated by traditional employers. So we are solving that as well. As mentioned, we are all living with personal experience, which makes us the experts in accessibility rather than just certifications and speaking about it. We live it, we breathe it, we have to deal with it every day. We actually have real people testing our projects, so from a varying degree of disabilities, whether it's cognitive, if it's visually impaired, if it's deaf, even with mobility. Some people don't use mice, they don't use the keyboard, they use it in different factors, and we sort of bring that to the table. And software is a great first stop for fixing accessibility, but it often misses issues. We call them false positives. And we fill up those gaps. So we definitely focused on a person userability possibilities for that. And then we provide flexible income and training opportunities. So we have some individuals that are on disability, and we work with them to help them get back into feeling like they can communicate and they can be productive and, you know, be a part of projects even though they can't work full time. And they're just so amazing. My team is awesome. Oops. And here's just a few of our team members here. We have, my goodness, we have designers, we have marketers, we have illustrators, we have photographers, you name it, we have it. And they're just a wonderful team. This is actually only part, we're up to 17 people now, from just a part-time perspective, and everyone's a contractor and we bring them in on a per need basis. A quick little graph just to illustrate when you're creating accessible marketing and communications that it actually impacts everyone. So even though we're the one doing that and it goes to our clients, if it's public facing, then it's the customers, which then goes to the community, and then as a greater good, it goes to society. So you can see the trickle down effect of making your marketing accessible. And just to give you a little bit of statistics, if you're wondering about, well, why should I make my website or my festival, you know, accessible? 6.2 million Canadians actually identify as having a disability. And a disability is not just being in a wheelchair, it's not just being blind, it's not just being deaf. You know, there's people with cognitive issues, there's a full spectrum in the autism community. There is people like myself who have invisible disability. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes I use a cane. That's approximately 1.85 million people in Ontario alone, and that's 15% of the world population. If you're familiar with the AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, the newest deadline came January 1st, where specific industries, so I mean, if you're under 50 people, if you're not public facing, it generally doesn't apply to you. However, we still want you to do that because it's good for business, is that you had to meet the level AA web accessibility guidelines. And if a fine is to come through for your company, if someone complains and the whole process is finalized and you do not fix it, you do face $50,000 to $100,000 per day. So it's a pretty significant fine. There is a process between the complaint and to the end process, but I like to point that out so you're aware of what the end issue could be. I can provide this after, but these are just some links that I've added. for different things to do with the laws. Website checkers, there's some things you can do with free checkers that you can check your own website. It may not mean a lot to you, but there's a few more other links up here, and we can circulate those after as well. And then just a little final note is why practices accessible design is that there are more than 1 billion people in the world with a disability. Accessible design means that you're creating tools that everyone can use, not just a select few, but the other part to think about is inclusion. So I know this, I did not create this chart, but it's used a lot. So a lot of people feel that equality is where it's at, but you'll notice, like I can talk about my own little girl having dwarfism. Yes, everyone's equally got something to stand on to see over the fence. But then we talk about equity, where you provide different sizes. And then we actually talk about justice, which I call inclusion, not justice, is you just take away the barriers altogether. So when you're creating your projects, whether it's in person or, you know, even digital online right now, if you take away the barriers to start, that's more important than just worrying about a line of code to fix your website. So that is my little presentation. And if you have any questions, you know, you can always feel free to reach out to me as well. Let me just stop that.
You mentioned businesses, and
yeah.
What about small businesses that are, you know, like under 10 people?
Well, technically, by law, they don't have to comply. However, I think what I always talk about is if it's not going to cost you extra, and traditionally people are quoting accessibility functions as extra, then I think it's good practice and it's good for business to build it in. I mean, if you were to build a brand new building, you would not put a wheelchair accessible button on your door. So if you're building a new website, knowing that somebody can't use it, it would be the same to us in the disability community is creating a website that you know specifically a certain race or gender couldn't use. You wouldn't do that. So think about the people who are blind, especially. And I focus on blind because it's the most common issue with an online function. You know, if it can be all integrated beforehand, it doesn't have to be a secondary feature. But technically, legally, in the, you know, the government's eyes, you do not have to do it. But you know, you want to think about that. It's definitely good for business.
So, you know, you're talking about online stuff. Is there, I'm going to use a simple term, checklist that people, because if they're going to get quotes for this, what is it that they should be looking for online, digital, and marketing material? What kinds of things do, if they're going to go to you or somebody who says that they provide accessible digital information, what should they be asking for?
I think it's easy to say and ask, is it accessible? But no, you need to know what that means.
Yeah.
So accessibility is not equated across the board as all equal, because it's still becoming part of people's thought processes and education is becoming more prevalent. It's not integrated into school systems. It's something that right now we're in that gap of fixing it. We're not creating new pieces from scratch quite often for businesses. I mean, if you think about a municipality that's had a website for 5 years, those projects are pretty hefty. But I think what's important is to talk about, if they say it's accessible, question what level of accessibility is. Specifically with the website, when we talk about the level AA compliance, that's the worldwide web guidelines. Ask them what level of compliance it is that they're including in that. And also, if you're seeing that as, in my opinion, it doesn't need to be, but many companies, and because I did this before, this is how I used to run my business. You would quote a design of anything and you'd say, and here's the cost to make it accessible. That's backwards thinking to me, now that I've experienced it firsthand in my own life, is that it doesn't take a lot of effort to rethink the process from the beginning and create accessible marketing communications documents, whether it's digital or print or anything like that. So really question why they're adding that as an extra cost, if that's how it is presented. And even if it's not, question them the extent of how accessible it is. What are they calling accessible? Because I know even I had to do a bunch of research for online platforms for an organization. So not something like Zoom. Zoom is certainly one of the most accessible ones to date. It still has some functions that need to be fixed, but if you've attended any virtual trade shows using like Feedloop or I think Hopin, those ones seem to be the most accessible, but based on some of the research I was speaking to, I think 6 or 7 different companies, and one of them was VFairs. I think they're American, but it is an online, conference platform that has, the networking and the trade shows and the breakout sessions, a little bit more robust than Zoom. Almost all of them just said that, yes, we meet basic user compliance, which functionally is to do with a web browser. And so the biggest feature or issue that you're going to find is someone who's blind, they generally have assistive technology, like a screen reader that they use. And yes, they can access it, but it doesn't mean that they can use it and navigate it. So you really have to get into the details. And it's not something that I have a checklist ready. It's something that we're actually working on to be able to provide as a free handout, because there's just so many options and it's confusing for people if you don't understand what to look for.
Right, right. That's why I was asked. I wondered if there was something that was available out there for people to look at.
Well, there will be, but I don't have a specific website that I could send you to for that.
Okay. No, that's good. That's good. And the statistics. So you mentioned, making, so there's marketing, but I was reading in some of the information that you sent me, on site. So we're the festival world, and you mentioned something in the notes. When you're doing fencing, make sure that it's, how do you do fencing so that somebody in a wheelchair or a little person or, how do you work like legally? Like, is there, for fencing, is there a minimum height that they're supposed to have, and all of those types of things? So how do you work that out?
Well, I'm not an expert in the built environment by any means, but one of our team members is very well versed in a lot of the built environment and has worked with a lot of government functions and things like that. So I think it's, maybe you can't always fix it, but try and provide alternatives and to think about the opportunities of what issues could arise based on those. For safety reasons and liability with insurance, you probably can't remove all your fencing, but could you provide an area for better viewing? Could you keep a space open? I think there's just looking for those alternatives if it can't be removed. The ultimate is to remove the barrier or to try and think differently. But certainly, I don't think there's necessarily one answer for that, because there's so many opportunities for, well, litigation specifically, but you certainly try and look at the barriers and how you can remove them, or not putting barriers in and creating a whole new idea of how to create that space.
I'm getting back to digital.
Yeah.
How would visually impaired, so there's software out there that reads text.
Yeah.
And what about if it's something on your website that's a video, or that isn't easily picked up by the software? Is that part of what you have to look out for?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we focused on, I mean, our lead auditor, he's completely blind. I don't know if he's watching today or not, but Andrew has been blind since his late 20s, and he uses something called JAWS, which is a screen reader. He's a very skilled user of this software. However, there's lots of people, some of the barrier to entry is the technology, because it's not always easy to use. Just to give you an education quick snippet, is when he's searching for something on the internet, it's taking him twice as long because the technology is using it for him. So, we get angry with a 1-minute Google search and it takes forever to come up. It's taking him 2-3 times longer. And it's a whole different set of actions for how he interprets things. And then the back end of your website, or, even a document like a PDF, if it's not built properly, structured properly, and coded, and I don't mean like extensive code, but it has to tell you, it needs to speak to screen readers. And even Apple is one of the most obviously inclusive technology platforms out there. It has a lot of the assistive technology built in. You know, the example I talked to you, Deb, about is if you are building something in columns, screen readers read left to right. If you haven't told the tech on the back end to read it in a certain, you know, combination, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the organization, it's just going to read it left to right. It doesn't know it's a headline. It doesn't know it's there. Another really great example is if you're putting in a photo, and I used to do this too in the past, you'll just say, oh, image1.jpg. Well, if that photo relies on the information and you want someone to, I mean, as a visual person, we put those photos in to give people a sense of how exciting an event is, or, you know, a project. Well, what are they getting out of that? So what you want to make sure is that you have descriptive and alternate text to be put in. So you would say, instead of image1.jpg, you know, it would say hockey photo, and then you would have the descriptive text. Most websites like WordPress and things like that let you build that in the back end. You would say, and again, don't just put picture of people playing hockey, put picture of hockey, or people playing pond hockey, father and son outside on a winter's day. You want them to try and have the same experience as you. It is more time consuming, but it's not fair that someone else can't have the same experience as the next person when it could take you maybe, you know, 5 more minutes to do that. So that's probably one of the bigger examples, is alternative text and making sure things are labeled in a proper reading order.
You also mentioned about the percentage of Canadians with a disability, which was 22%, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But, and your graph showed this, but if you're not accessible, either online or physically, it has much more greater impact than just the 22%, right? It's
I mean,
family,
it could,
friends.
yeah, family, friends, support workers, other organizations. I mean, most people with disabilities probably don't need somebody to help them, but they do have family behind them that will probably be an advocate for them. And then, you know, if someone's upset and then you've asked for a request maybe to accommodate someone, or they've asked you, and then you deny that. Not everybody denies it. I think it's more prevalent in the US, but certainly you're leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. And I go back to the same thing. You wouldn't build a new building without accessibility built into it, because you wouldn't want people to not enter your building. It's harder to retrofit. It's the same thing online as it is in the physical format. It's harder to fix it, but it's much easier to make it accessible right from the beginning. And a lot of designers and agencies don't have the experience that we do for that. And that's why we built our team out of individuals who live it. You know, there is some certifications out there for this, but there's not a whole lot. So we felt like putting a team together of people who live this and have experienced these, that we can tell you exactly what could happen and why, and just kind of go from there.
Remember, everyone listening, this is great information. If you have any questions, oh, here we go. Kyle. Kyle, Deb raises a great question in terms of on-site accessibility at festivals. In planning a festival on street closure, even though the street was upgraded to meet accessibility standards, a street closure may create new barriers, as you can change pathways for people with mobility devices, block access to curbs, or reach businesses, etc.
So I have to say, I got my pants in a bunch when they started doing this. I don't know what other way to say it. It's tough, because I get it. Like, from COVID, all of these companies are struggling, and you want to generate income and you want to get people and bums in seats. But all of a sudden, it's not just people in wheelchairs, it's seniors too. Like, there's mobility issues. My youngest, who has dwarfism, she can't walk very far. So if I can't use an accessible pass for her, how am I going to get to that place? So that's one of the things that it's come up in a few community groups too. People are losing their parking downtown, which, you know, all of a sudden they know that they may have some senior clientele that go to their stores when these events happen. I think New Hamburg did it for sure. Alora, I think City of Kitchener. I don't know what the solution is for that, but I think it's something that they didn't put into the plan. And I think that's definitely a negative in that side, because how far can you go? I mean, if you just use a cane, you can still walk, but you can only walk so far. If you need to sit, that's another problem with COVID. You know, going to a store and all of a sudden you can't use the bathroom, that doesn't mean that you have issues, but I mean, some people do. You know, what if it was somebody who's gone through colon cancer and they have a colostomy bag? Like, these are things that COVID hasn't taken into consideration. And while we're trying to come up with these alternatives, like closing down downtowns, where's the parking? Where's the mobility? Where's the seating? You know, we're excluding more people than we realize. And that's also a family thing. So because you have strollers.
And Kyle says he has follow-up comment if there's time. Yeah, you do. Kyle, just unmute yourself and chat with us.
Okay, sure. Just wanted to make sure it was okay to jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was helping to plan a festival, that I really wanted to focus on accessibility from the start. So I reached out to the province because they had great resources, and I found out that they had accessibility training for their volunteers from the Pan Am Games. And they were very willing to share that so that you could train volunteers in how to support people with disabilities, even in terms of seniors or people who may be sensitive to certain stimulation, which was a really big help. But yeah, one of the biggest things that I wanted to focus on from the start was when I talked to the city and the BIA, they were like, you know, we've completely redesigned our streetscape, so everything is very accessible. But when you change how that street is used, close it down, put tents on the street, things like that, it changes how people access, may block those curb bump outs and things. I don't have all the answers yet, but I think it's a great thing to consider from the start, is how everyone can access that space.
Yeah, I think it's changing your thinking from, you know, a traditional process to a human-centered design thinking process. What is the journey from the beginning to the end? So while some things are more accessible, so I sit on our regional municipality advisory committee, so I see a lot of the projects come in. Curb cuts especially, they're not just for people with disabilities, they're actually beneficial to everyone. They're beneficial who might just not do a great job walking, or, you know, it's beneficial to bicycles, it's beneficial to strollers. But for someone who's blind, or if they're using, you know, a walking assistant cane, or all of a sudden everything is in a different space. So you do definitely have to have volunteers or people who can assist, but then getting to that location is also not easy, because now all the parking is gone. So what are the alternatives for that? Do you have a trolley? Do you have, you know, like a little bus that brings people in? But then again, we're dealing with COVID. So I mean, I don't think anyone has the proper solution. I think COVID has brought up a lot of great points for people with disabilities from all areas, especially with remote work. But it's not an easy situation. But I remember as soon as I saw that, I'm like, well, now you have no parking. How are you going to get there? You know, if you have a bad knee and you use a walker, how are you going to get to it? You're parking 3 blocks away. That's too far. That's too far even for me. And I only use my cane occasionally now. So I wish I had the answer, but there's definitely some problems that we need to try some new creative thinking about.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to try to do, and I didn't get the chance, was I reached out to a person who does the stopgap ramps, like they build the temporary ramps for businesses, and tried to hopefully get the city or the BIA to invest in getting those ramps, so that there's temporary ramps that can be installed on curbs during street closure, so that there's more ways to access and get over that curb to reach businesses.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
but no feedback from that though, probably, or
I didn't get the chance. It was yeah, I just didn't get the chance to continue, but I think it would be a great thing for maybe BIAs to reach out and build maybe like things that every event that hosts during that time can can use it. So that
Yeah.
maybe those are just city property that you can get those ramps so that everyone can, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just like putting the patio seating out now. More people are getting approved for patio seating because they want them to be outside, but then you're losing the space for walking, wheeling, biking. You're losing that space. So you run into other issues. So I mean, no matter what you do, you try and make something better, you're running into another issue. So I think it's a matter of trying to get a bunch of people together and put their heads together to try and think different. But it's nice to hear that you're thinking about that from the beginning, because it's quite often it's always an afterthought, and it's not intentional, but we're trying to rearrange and check out people's perspectives and change those perspectives to put that conversation on the forefront.
Mhm. Well, that sounds like it may be happening. Deb, I'll leave it. It looks like Lisa has a comment there.
Okay.
Thanks, Kyle. So Lisa says, I work for municipality. We started doing accessibility audits at our events with our inclusion coordinator and a representative from our accessibility advisory committee. This has been very helpful in our planning. So yeah, any comments, Jolene?
Well, I sit on an advisory committee. I sit on the GRAC, the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee. So I am privy to a lot of the projects that come in. And I would definitely advise anyone, if they have the opportunity, to bring it to a municipal advisory committee wherever they are. Such great perspectives. They're a fantastic group of volunteers that donate their time and their life experiences to this. And we have, in our case, we have a really phenomenal group, and it will give you a lot of insights into alternatives and what you can do and what you shouldn't do. And just a lot of positive feedback can come from it.
And, you know, one of the things Kyle was talking about the Pan Am Games, and I was wondering, you know, Invictus, wasn't Invictus in Toronto a couple of years ago, the Invictus Games? I wonder if they have a, because it's all about accessibility for them, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, I wonder if they have a list. That's just something to look into. Just a forethought on that. You know, I have another question too, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but even about accessibility for people with disabilities, there's also accessibility, because I was talking to another group a few months ago, and it's about including, it was the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for LGBTQ+, and it's all about inclusion as well. So do you, or does AOTA or whatever, it would seem be valuable to have people sit around a table, so that when companies are starting to look at this, if it's new or you know, revamping what they're doing, to make sure that people cover all different aspects of.
Well, we often talk about accessibility, but we don't often talk about inclusion. So I will use my life experience as an example. So the school board is quite different, but when my daughter, the youngest one, started school, you know, JK, SK, you go through a special equipment assistance plan through the school board. And she needed accommodations. She needed an IEP, which is individual education plan. But for her, it was physical accommodations. So she needed these stools. She'd already been going to the bathroom and doing whatever she needed on her own, using stools at her daycare, at home. We get into the school, and, you know, we're told that we have to wait 6 to 8 weeks once she gets into school before she can even have the equipment. So there's a problem. So it's a bit backwards, but where I'm going with that is the bathroom in the kindy room had a small toilet and a small sink, and she could reach everything. But they tried to push her to use the accessible washroom across the hall, because it was already, I say quote unquote, I'm using the quotes, accessible, but she doesn't fit it. It's big. She has to use higher ramps. So they felt that was fine, but then that also excluded her from her peers. So at that point, she already knew that she was a little bit different. It wasn't as prevalent as it is now, because she's like half the size of her peers, but they felt that was okay and that she should wait for that. And then, you know, not have to order it because this is how it's always been done. Well, Mama Bear came out, as people who know me well, that comes out quite often. And I said to them, I said, so if she has to go over there, you're making her walk twice as far. So mobility is sometimes an issue for her on certain days that she was having pain or her hips are not functioning properly. I said, why can you not just get her a stool? I offered to buy the stool. I offered to have it built, but they were more worried about the liability of all the other students in the classroom with the stool in a small bathroom rather than making her walk across the hall and use equipment that was twice as large. So that's where that graphic that I showed in my presentation about justice, what I call it inclusion, makes a huge difference. So I fought for it. I got her equipment on the first day of school, and she was able to be with her friends. So accessibility and inclusion are not the same. The combination of the two together are far better. And having the opportunity to be with her peers and have the equipment she needs is really true accessibility. They really need to go hand in hand. Just because you have an accessible bathroom available, like a porta potty or something, but it's 100 miles away from everybody else, I think they forget that kids in particular, they just want to be like everybody else. And if it's just slight adjustments, it's something to really take into consideration. We've had the issues a few times with the bathrooms wanting to, just this is how you make it accessible. But accessibility doesn't mean that it's always the right choice, and how you portray it and how it's, built. So it's certainly something to try and integrate the two thought processes together.
Yeah,
I don't know if that really answered it, because I go on my tangents of being angry still.
I think it did, because there's a lot of different groups about inclusion and accessibility, and it would, yeah, you don't, especially bigger companies, you don't want to leave out any of those, in my humble opinion.
Yep.
And I'm very clear, because I don't have any, I say I don't have any accessibility issues, and I don't. So I don't even think about those things.
Yep, and I didn't either.
Yeah. So it's all in education. So is there a timeline, a deadline for all of this? Because you and I were talking, and two different dates.
Yeah. Well, the AODA, so the provincial standard, the goal is for 2025, and the Accessible Canada Act, what did we find out? Was it 2040?
2040, yeah.
For all of Canada. So our director of content is involved with the Accessible Canada Act. She was part of that, except I don't remember dates. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening. Every province has their mandate, but Ontario, based on being here, I know a little bit more about that. It's very web focused right now, which even more so because of the pandemic, everything's moved to being online. However, they did delay the one piece of the AODA till June because of COVID. I think that had to do with policies and procedures. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they moved the deadline to June for that part. But the web accessibility, the level AA compliance has stayed in place. So as of January 1st, if you met the criteria for who had to be accessible, and I have that in my notes because I never remember. So businesses and nonprofits with 50 or more employees, all municipalities, libraries, all public and those private libraries with 50 or more employees, public sector organizations, and public and private sector educational institutions, regardless of staffing, are those that need to comply with the level AA. So if your website is not up to that, quality of what is expected and what's said in the laws, and someone launches a complaint and it goes to the department in the province where they look into it, that's when you need to start worrying, because it's a lot easier and cheaper to fix it now and at least have a plan in place. I don't think you're going to get a fine just off the top. They're not going to not investigate it and give you the opportunity to fix it. But yeah, those are the type of things you're looking for. One of the gray areas was if you are government funded. We talked about that, and I can't find the proper verbiage for that, but some things that we were talking about is if you were government funded, some things apply to you, but I can't find that information right now.
That's something we can get to later. Shelley, sorry you had to go, but thanks for being here. I can't remember what I was going to ask now because I got distracted.
I do that.
I think so. For smaller organizations, it would, if we are either updating or redoing, it would benefit us to do something like this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, even though you don't have to legally be compliant, you don't want to fine. We don't go out doing sales with a fear mongering. There's a lot of companies promoting accessibility right now that are doing that. And that's all they focus on is that, oh, you're going to get fined. It's going to cost you a lot. Litigation is going to be involved. Sure it is. But we also live in Canada and we know that they're going to go through a process. I think it's more important to think about the human-centered side and the empathy side of, you know, imagine at some point in everyone's lives, we're going to be impacted by disability, whether it's a family, a friend, we could be hurt and temporarily disabled. You know, myself, it came later on in life, have a child, or become a senior and have mobility issues. We are all going to be affected by it. So it's important to continue the conversation and just talk about the education and advocacy. And that's one thing that we take great pride in, is not the fear mongering side, but even from a small business. Yes, sometimes it will cost you a little bit more to come to a bigger company that focuses on it, but you know, yes, you can do a Wix website for free, but even Wix has some accessibility built in now. Take a look at it. Like, you know, I'm not saying you have to go out to tender to get all your projects done, but make it part of your thinking process, make it one of your checklists. So when you're creating your own project, you go, oh, can everyone use this? Most often we'll create PDFs for posters, you know, for festivals and stuff and throw them up on a website. If it's a photo of the poster, you can't read the text if you're on a screen reader. You have no idea what it's saying. So, you know, you could run a test, and I had some links here I could provide. You can run tests on your website with free website checkers. I had a recent municipality get 99% accessibility compliance. We did a usability audit with our auditor who is blind, and it is horrible. He could not do a building permit. He could not volunteer for an event. He could not properly apply for a job. He could not do many things. All of the documents from council minutes and things like that, not accessible. So from someone who lives in that town, if they live alone, and they do, like, just because we have disability doesn't mean we don't live on our own. It just makes life even harder. And then you're not having the whole inclusive piece of, you just feel like you are a handout all the time. And, you know, that's why a lot of people end up on disability, because people can't seem to accommodate them. It's just changing our thinking.
Our practices. Now, how is the word getting out to people with websites? Like the accessibility. Do you have any idea? Because
I
know
that there was some campaigns through the provincial, but they're not, I can't think of one in particular right now. I know with larger companies, they've had to make it part of their HR process. So they're very aware of what needs to be done. So I'm not sure, because I've never been in that side, of how that information gets trickled down to them, but I would assume it's through WSIB and, you know, HR practices and things like that, because you do have to do, a lot of the companies, you have to do the basic training. There is basic training through the province as well.
I was just curious about that. If there's, because whenever you register for any kind of website, you get a notification from whatever the Canadian body is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember seeing, if even for a small one website, one person website or one small business, if they even talk about that. But I guess it would be hard to, because if you're a one-man shop, you're not, you know, you don't comply, right? You don't have to, even though it would be a good for you, it's not mandatory.
Yeah, it isn't. It certainly isn't. And you probably won't think of it, because if you've never been impacted by it in your life, it's not something it's not top of mind, right? So that's what we're really focusing on, is just talking about it more. And that's why coming here is always helpful, you know, that we can talk about that.
Yeah, great. I don't have any other questions for you. Does anybody have anything? Anything you want to share or ask Jolene? You can just unmute yourself if you want and ask your question. No? Okay. Well, I think we're going to, oh, just a minute. Nope. people are just thanking us. Great information. Thank you. Nope, that was helpful. Thanks. So thank you, Jolene, for being here with us, for sharing your experience and your ideas and what it is that you're doing for making this world a more accessible, or at least our province, making our province a more accessible.
We're working on it.
Next the world.
Yeah, no, that's the plan. I mean, I am not the expert in all things, so, but our team definitely comes together. 85% of us on our team, and I said we're up to about 17 now, actually have a disability ourselves. And they vary from all over the spectrum of all the options that you can think of having a disability and different life experiences. I have a brand new team member that is colorblind, and she's an oh my gosh, the most amazing artist. And she's devoid of all color, but you would never know. Her art and her paintings are just phenomenal, but she's not working because people don't seem to know how to accommodate her. So really, it's time to keep talking about it. It's time to have these conversations and to change people's perspectives. And honestly, COVID has done a lot for that in a positive manner, because now we can work from home. You don't have to be micromanaged. Our staff are not expected to work 9 to 5. I don't care when they work, as long as they get the job done within the expectations that we set. And they're always welcome to provide their feedback. And I think their life experiences and their disabilities are the superpowers here. It's not the opposite.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This recording will be up probably tomorrow sometime on YouTube, and we'll send a message out to everybody. Next week, we have, I think it's Chris McCool from Sultans of String is going to be coming and talking with us. And I want to thank you so much. And we will see you next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
Bye.